Hey guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to Tacticalbassin. Today what we are talking about is how to catch fish on those bright, sunshiny winter days. The exact opposite conditions of what I've got out here today. Now the first thing that you need to do with that bright sunshine is figure out whether or not it's post-frontal. What I mean by that is you need to know how long it's been since the last storm front blew through. Was it raining yesterday? Was it raining 3 days ago? Was it raining a week ago? You need to figure that out. Typically post-frontal, so right after that storm leaves, the day or two after the storm is going to be your most difficult fishing. It's often associated with a lot of wind, a cold snap, and overall very tough conditions. If that happens, you're probably turning to the spinning rod, your most finesse gear. Maybe throwing the tube, or the Ned Rig, a shaky head. You're gonna have to do what it takes to catch fish. Those are the difficult conditions. Really slow down. Sometimes this is when we're dragging rather than really fishing a bait. You're almost just pulling it on the bottom, just picking up those fish. The fish that physically get uncomfortable after the storm. There's a pressure change and it's very difficult for the fish to adapt to that pressure change. So most of the time they're going to get right down and lay on the bottom, down in the mud or down in the rocks, and just sort of wait that out as that pressure changes. But there is a second kind of summertime, or excuse me, of wintertime sunny day. That second kind is those warm days. If it's been 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days since you've really had a storm come through, temperatures are starting to rise a little bit with that sun. Maybe it's calmer out, it's not blowing 30 miles an hour out of the north. When you see those conditions where it's bright bluebird sky, but it's also warmer than it's been, that is prime time to hit the water. And a lot of people overlook it. A lot of people look at all those winter sunny days the same. They're not. They're very, very different. So those warmer winter days, you want to be on the water. The number one bait that I'm throwing, and we talked about this last week, so this is no surprise to you, is that jig. Throw some version of a finesse jig. This is a true finesse jig, round ball. You could throw a football, finesse football. There's a variety of different jigs. But like I said in that video last week, we'll keep this part short because we just talked about it. But very, very light line. Throwing that finesse jig so you have a light wire hook that's easy to set so you can go to lighter line. I'm fishing 12-pound leader on 20-pound braid. This is an 853, same rod we just talked about. So it's a rod that I can throw a shaky head, I can throw a lot of different things on, but I can also throw a light wire jig. It's a really good rod to overlap different things throughout the year. But that jig, it's going to shine in the winter because it tends to get bigger bites. Doesn't always get the most bites, but it gets the big bites. Well, those bright, sunshiny, warmer, midday, mid-afternoon, where the sun is at its highest, that's when those best fish are going to come out and feed for a short window. So why not be throwing the best meal that you can be for them? And typically, that's a jig. Pair it with a double tail grub, catch a ton of fish on the jig in the wintertime. And it's not complicated. I mean, there's a lot of ways to catch them. You can just drag that jig, just slow pull it on the water, on the bottom. You can shake it and hop it and work it aggressively. But dragging tends to work. The colder the water gets, the less movement I give that jig. I fish it just really, really slow on bottom. But this week actually had a bunch of success where we'd see the fish on the electronics. You'd actually see them on the graph. There'd be a little arch on the electronics. That tells me there's a fish directly under the boat. I'd free spool that jig straight down on top of them and then set the hook. Worked quite a few times, catching those fish that I'd see and then drop down into 20 or 30 feet of water and pick them off. Typically for doing that sort of thing, for dropping on them, I use a heavy head, like a 3/4 ounce football, so it gets down there quickly. That's another perk of that double tail grub, is it swims really well on the way down. So even when it's just crashing to bottom past those fish, it looks good and they'll take a shot at it. Now, one other benefit of the sun is that it opens up a completely different way that these fish feed. the higher the sun gets in most fisheries, especially in fisheries that have shad in them, the bass will begin to look up. Now, they're not actively chasing shad, right? You might see balls of bait on your electronics and there's no fish on them at all because they're not willing to pursue them in cold water. Cold water being water in the, say, 40-degree range. Typically, bass won't run the bait when it gets that cold, but they will still look for bait. So on the cloudy days, now this is just a rule of thumb. Understand that every fishery is different, but this applies most places and it will probably apply to you. On the cloudy days, the fish tend to focus on the bottom. They tend to eat down, eat a jig, eat a tube, eat a worm, but they're feeding on craws or things that are on bottom. Now on those sunnier days, they're still doing that. They're still eating on the bottom, but they're more apt to look up. They're more apt to feed up onto bait of some sort, and that's where the small swim bait comes into play. When you get that bright sunny afternoon, that's prime time. And actually it's prime time to throw the giant swim baits too. But if you're just trying to catch fish this winter, if you're just trying to get through the winter blues, that small swim bait is a great way to go. I throw, typically I'll throw like a 4.8, Keitech 4.8 on a 1/2 ounce head. And this is the Matt Allen swim bait head. Obviously that's the head I would be throwing. But a 1/2 ounce head, fairly stout hook. And then I also throw the 3.8, which is a little bit smaller. I'll throw that on a 3/8 ounce head with a smaller hook. That way you can really slow down and again, throw it on lighter line. So you pair it accordingly. I'm throwing this on a 7'2" heavy with the new Corrado on it. Fast retrieve, but that allows me to just, because it is such a fast reel, I just slow roll, really slow on my end. I'm not grinding to make that thing stay in the water column. But what's nice about a bait like this, that small Keitech, is if you go to the side of the boat and you lower it down, take about 10 feet of line out and just drop it. Count how long it takes for that to get to the bottom or to get down 10 feet. And remember that number, whether that's 4 seconds or 6 seconds or 7 seconds, whatever it is, on those sunny days where those fish tend to lift off the bottom a little bit. Let's say I'm fishing in 30 feet of water, but the fish are in 20 feet. They're kind of getting up off the bottom a little. If I know it takes 7 seconds for my bait to fall 10 feet, then if I cast out and I give it a 14 count, that's going to get my bait to 20 feet. And then I can just slow roll, maintain depth at 20 feet, and I'm swimming parallel to bottom 10 feet up, and those fish will come up and feed up onto that bait. You can also fish these baits hard on bottom. Throw them out, let them hit, and then just creep right on bottom like you would the giant Huddlestons or any of the other swim baits. Just let them creep right down on bottom. But you don't have to. You can fish them up in the column. Throw it out, count it down to the depth you want, start rolling, those fish will come right up to feed on it. Works incredibly well. Now again, not all fisheries are designed the same. Not all bass in each fishery behave the same. So you need to try it in your fishery. But if you're looking at your electronics, and that's assuming you're on a boat, obviously. If you're on the bank, it's just guesswork. You need to try both. But if you're on the boat and you notice that those arches that were right on the bottom have now picked up just a little bit, that's when it's time to pick up that small swim bait, count it down, and try and fish right above those fish. Should work really well for you. Again, my number one is that jig. I love throwing that jig in the wintertime. Some version of a finesse jig, and typically with that twin tail grub on it. That's at least where I'm gonna start. If that's not working, I'll try that beaver style tail, that dead action, slow dragging on bottom, see if that will work. And then if I see those fish lift up, I'm gonna go to that swim bait. Only exception is if it's just after the storm, you've got that wind coming in, it's cold, and you know those fish are just gonna hold bottom. That's when we go back and we throw the tube, the drop shot, the shaky head, the Ned Rig, and fish painfully slow just to try and get a bite. I hope that helps you guys this winter. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and good luck on the water.